Hey everyone, I wanted to chime in with a few brief notes about fiction and nonfiction literature for children. Because we're not diving so deeply into this subject matter where you're reading a lot of articles and research, I thought I should share some things that stand out to me from the research that I've done that I feel like you might want to know about so that you can decide what you might want to look further into. So, first of all, fiction is pretty commonly advocated for children for obvious reasons that correlate with things that you've already started to express this quarter. That children should spend their time being imaginative and having their imagination cultivated, fostered, encouraged. And obviously, in fiction, especially fantasy, we see world building and risk taking and adventure. And so, those kinds of books allow students, young readers, to step into the text and sort of escape reality. But Russell also teaches us that even in that escapism, they're practicing reality because all of these fantasy, for instance, pieces of work tend to reflect back on reality and make a statement about reality and how it could be, should be, or is. I think even if there are some of us in the group who don't prefer fantasy, we can still accept that makes sense and that it's a good idea to give children fiction literature. But you'll find all sorts of articles all over the internet, in libraries, discussing the importance of fiction, especially at that time in a child's life. And so one of the questions that I've seen some students ask in the past has been, what at younger ages do these readers understand that what they're reading is fiction or is fantasy? And I just started to scratch the surface of this because it's not necessarily a literature question. It's more of a child development question, like what we discovered in our survey of literary history. It starts to overlap a little, right? That literature starts to coincide with these most famous changes and movements in child development theory. That said, it's not my wheelhouse, but I find it so intriguing and it's relevant to our learning here. So I started to look into that. And you'll find like at age 3, there's a difference, and then at age 6, and then at age 12. And at each of those stages, children start to develop more skills for identifying cues that would tell them that something is not real. And one thing I think is just kind of a random but memorable point I read was that children learn pretty early on that if an adult tells them something, that they can trust that more than they can trust what a peer tells them. And so they're practicing this all the time of like, how do I know if this is make-believe or if this is real? And some of the arguments are that giving children fiction actually fosters that skill growth, that because it forces them into a make-believe world and asks them to pause and say, like, are dragons real? That then they're actually developing that skill more quickly and more effectively. And so there's more and more research on this, and it actually starts to funnel into whether or not you should tell children that there's a Santa Claus, which is not not what we're going to be doing here, but it's kind of an interesting thing to research if you're interested. Someday, every quarter I chip away at this course and add more and more to it and research further. So someday I've thought it would be cool to have a chart that shows, just like we did in the survey of literary history, how the reality versus fiction difference pans out for children across their lifespan. But here's something else that I want to throw out there that I found recently. The National Council for Teachers of English, NCTE, published a statement, and they do this often for language arts teachers. They published a statement about the importance of nonfiction literature for children. And they said that not enough of it, because fantasy has been so commonly known as important, and rightfully so, then nonfiction has sort of gone by the wayside. And some readers really need nonfiction in order to be readers. that they hit this point or this stage in their life, maybe it's their personality, maybe it's their reading stage, where nonfiction informational books are what would keep them reading. And the goal with a lot of these reading specialists and their arguments and their articles is just, I've seen this being the primary thing being expressed. Reading is good, period. Reading is good. We'll get into it later, but there's some backlash about, oh no, my child is reading graphic novels. What if that's all they read for the rest of their lives? Reading is good, period. So that's another reason why expanding our knowledge of genres and really accepting the value in all of these different genres can help us to be the kinds of people that grow readers up, because we can say, yes, that is good and here's why, and that is good and here's why. So try not to privilege for, all of people what genre is better. Just know that you have your own preference, and once you kind of embrace that, you can see yourself as more of a reader. I look back and think I stopped reading because I remember making jokes like, I like stories about real people, but that's not what I was assigned in school. And so I thought I didn't like reading, but really it was because I personally didn't have enough access to nonfiction literature, or didn't realize the access that I did have and how to capitalize on it. Everyone around me was so excited about these worlds and these experiences, and I didn't have that. That wasn't what I longed for in a book. But I do love reading, and it took me until adulthood to really settle back into that as a person. Just some things to chew on for you. And I'm going to provide one link for you, just kind of for fun, right under the video. Can children understand the difference between fantasy and reality? So no pressure, just optional if you want to check that out.